Hi, I'm Em.
And my name is Bea.
And this is
Fangirls Anonymous. A quick warning, this podcast is not for kids.
We get into some pretty explicit stuff.
But if you're still with us and into that, welcome.
Good evening, Bea.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Are we mustache twirling villains now? Is that where we're going with this? I could do that.
Yes.
That could be cool.
I hold a cane and you have a mustache.
It's very fair. This is an equitable arrangement. Who wears the top hat?
You do. The cane has a glass vial of poison in it, though.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
Yes,
And
this
it's
is
a poison,
definitely equitable.
It's a poison that only poisons, I don't know, ducks or something. Like, I don't know.
What did ducks ever do to you?
Ducks have done everything to me.
All right, we're
going to try to keep this
in the tragic backstory column. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so, good, duck. Good. You're just like your father. It's a fine. Okay, so, how's it going, Bea?
Much better now that we have officially sorted out our villainous responsibilities. I can go forward with confidence.
Who said we have to be a villain, though? I know you did, but, just because we have mustaches and top hats and vials filled with poison doesn't mean we're necessarily villains.
We'll take that under advisement.
The villainous villains of villainy will take that under advisement. Okay. So today we're doing a fun little episode about nothing what we just talked about. We're doing School AUs.
Nothing to do.
We're just talking about villains. No, we're talking about schools. We're talking about the framework of fic that has to do something about school time. And we're going to get into that a whole lot. It's going to be really fun. But beforehand, a little bit of podcast homework. We have a Patreon. If you want to support us on Patreon, we would be incredibly grateful. If you like us that much and want to give us money, oh my gosh, be so grateful. Thank you to even the people who have even considered it. Thank you. But if you want to support us in a different way, you can always give us a rating somewhere, wherever you listen to us. That'd be nice. Thank you so much if you have already, and thank you to the people who are going to / are considering it. And if you want to be involved in the podcast a little bit more personally, you can always read the fics that we have in our recs, but also the fics that we have for Fic Club this season. They are in the show notes. All of them kind of have to do with food. They're really cute. They're shorter. And at the end of the season, we will be doing a episode on the emails that you guys send us at mmbpresents@gmail.com with all of your comments and analyses and jokes, and it's going to be great. And then also our opinions as well, because we absolutely love those fics and we want to hear what you have to say too. It's Fic Club. So yeah, podcast homework done. But okay, School AUs. You would think we could literally just say it's a structure for fic that we see a lot and just has to do with school. And then we would be done. But there's a lot more to say than that, actually. With every podcast episode we do, I guess you could say that, but well, maybe not ABO. You can't just say there's no on the tin for that kind of
No.
thing. It's a whole book.
I don't know. I feel like it's a if you know thing, because then it's on the tin, but otherwise that iceberg goes very deep.
Oh, it does. Mansplaining apparently is also a word that the very old supernatural fandom created. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
I know. Talking about how Dean's mansplained in just a conversation. It's fascinating. I read that.
Oh.
Supernaturalism is so intense. A lot of things wouldn't have happened without that show happening in our society.
I feel like for any given trope, you can pretty much go, was it Star Trek or was it supernatural?
Or was it X-Files?
Yeah, X-Files is definitely bridges the gap.
The term shipping comes from them. So, yeah, it's kind of important, but not as much as you would consider like Star Trek or Supernatural.
Mhm,
Anyway, School AUs. School AUs. That is a term that is such an umbrella, right? Like
mhm,
it's such a like so many different subtropes exist under that term. And here are some of them. So there are high school AUs. There aren't
mhm.
middle school AUs necessarily. I
I
think that's a very rare one.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen that done,
I
so
don't
I
think
guess
I
there's
have either.
a gap there, there's a niche to be filled, although,
There is a niche, but nobody
gotta
wants
be
to read
honest,
that.
yeah, your benefits to as compared to high school AU are just slightly a lot more unhinged.
Yeah.
Because 'cause I'm sorry, we've met middle schoolers, they make high schoolers look civilized,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
terrible. But on the other hand, your shipping gets a whole lot more suspect. So,
A little bit. College AUs is another type, which we will talk about all of these. And then the rarer types are like boarding school AU.
which you could consider a boarding school kind of an extension of the high school AU, except for you are getting rid of the parental figures. You're like, it's high school
Truly.
without parents.
It's high school with adults around them who don't love them.
Yeah, pretty much.
So that's interesting. And then there's elementary slash kindergarten AUs, which most of the time if that is the case, then it's usually the adults who are like involved in the life of a kindergartner, not the shipping between two kindergartners. Like that's not really happening. It happens sometimes, but
Again, there's this one's weird because I feel like it definitely you have this funny gray zone because yeah, a lot of the time it ends up basically being a subgenre of kid fic, but
mhm.
every once in a while somebody will write them as two little squirts in kindergarten who met on the first day and had kid adventures, you know?
You
And it
little squirts.
so sometimes it either ends up being crack where it's like that is just
Yeah,
ridiculous, or it ends up being usually a cute little one shot where it's like they had this little kitty adventure and then they it's implied that then either canon happens or they meet later in life and that's really where the fluff happens. And you see this one a lot with like a good example would be say Teen Wolf where there's a little bit of an age gap, but if like say kindergarten styles met elementary schooler Derek and they had a cute little adventure or whatever, you can see that
that's
sometimes.
adorable. Yeah, yeah, you can see that. And then there are magic school AUs, so like Hogwarts or non-Hogwarts. I don't like that the definition extends between Hogwarts and non-Hogwarts, but that's the easiest way to say it now because people are more familiar with Hogwarts. Example, I am actually reading Carry On by Rainbow Rowell for the first time right now because a very good friend of mine, thank you, Ace, told me to read it because she's reading it again. And obviously, it is, if you don't know anything about it, it's essentially, it's very meta. It's essentially a real life author writing a fan fiction of a character that she wrote in one of her books called Fangirl, and the fan fiction that that character is writing is essentially fic of a of a series of books that is made up by this real life author that is very reminiscent of Harry Potter.
That's
So
a lot
I'm
of
reading,
layers.
yes, I'm reading the fan fiction of a made up series of books right now. And it's reminiscent of Harry Potter. It's very interesting, actually. It feels a little odd reading it. Like if I didn't know that that's where this story was coming from, I don't think I would like it. But because I know all of the layers, I'm like, okay, I can read this. It's fun. It feels incredibly meta to what fan fiction is, and that's fun for me, obviously, as the person who like loves fan fiction and has a podcast. But yeah, I think it's interesting because I am reading a school AU right now, but not in the way you would think. Anyway, there are also teacher AUs, which, like, to me is very much a school AU, but other people will classify it just strictly as a teacher AU because it's like, it's not about the students, it's about the teachers. But in my opinion, if it's about either, it's just a school AU. So we'll talk about that later a little bit more. But then, what's the Academy era be?
So, Academy era is sort of an umbrella term that, this is going to shock you, originated with Star Trek. And in Star Trek, it represented fic that was about the characters when they were at Starfleet Academy. Now, the thing about that is it's really easy to essentially use that formula for any kind of canon where you meet them in their adult professional lives to project backwards into when they were going to school, whatever that looked like. So the academy. And so academy era are, I don't know, the opposite of future fic. Instead of projecting forward to what happens after canon, you're projecting backwards to what happened before canon, which, fun fact, real publishers do this too, because the small number of Star Trek novels that accompanied J.J. Abrams' 2009 verse, the movies, the Star Trek reboot movies, several of them were set in the quote unquote Academy era, which is, in my opinion, the funniest possible thing they could have done. Because instead of projecting into the 5-year mission, which they explicitly have, they went, we'll go backwards. And see, the problem is Kirk and Spock meet for the first time in the movie. So having it set before that means that you want to have both of those characters in your novel, but you have to scramble desperately so that they never ever meet. It's the funniest possible choice you could have made for novels.
Oh my goodness gracious. But of course it goes back to Star Trek. Of course it does. Everything that we now know and love is because of Star Trek fan fiction people in the 60s. Love that for us. Okay, so that's the trope, essentially.
I mean, there's probably 100 different other variants that you could get in there.
Of course.
Uh,
Of course. But we tried to do as much. These are the spokes of the umbrella, right?
mhm.
Like they're,
They're the
yeah.
main
I
branches
mean,
on the tree. There's lots of smaller
yeah.
branches and twigs and leaves poking
There's a
off, but
exactly. There's a bunch of others, but we everything in between those spokes is like cool thick, I'm sure. But we just wanted to get into, like, the main highways of this trope. And
mm,
those are the main highways. But there's not a whole lot of explanation about what the definition of this trope is. It's not Hanahaki, right? Like, it's not super, complex and interesting. Not that Hanahaki is necessarily complex, but you're like listening to it and you're like, why? This is like, oh yeah, okay, it's set in a school somehow. Like, some academia is somehow involved. I guess the more interesting aspect of school AUs is like, why do people want to write so many school AUs? Because it really is almost ubiquitous. Like, I don't,
mhm.
unless it's a very tiny fandom, I don't think that there is a fandom out there that has a set following that doesn't have at least one, or if not multiple.
I gotta be honest, if there's for any given fandom, I feel like there are 3 things that you will see always, and it's gonna be fix it, it's gonna be
Yes.
missing scenes of some flavor, and it's gonna be
Sure.
one of your mainstay fluffs, and this is one of them. Having a high school AU or a college
Yeah.
AU is right up there with having a coffee shop AU. It's just like, this is a fandom now. You have this in it.
It's funny. I'm seeing a lot more tattoo parlor and florist
Oh yeah, that's definitely in
AUs.
vogue.
I'm seeing a lot more of those specifically recently, or in the last 5 years. But yes, it's true. Like, if you're gonna find a fluffy or a semi fluffy fic in a fandom, it's like one of those three. It's either a coffee shop AU, a tattoo slash florist AU, or a school AU. And I think we have some reasons here why. But if you think that you have a reason that we don't list here, go ahead and email us. We would love to know what you
Mhm.
think. Um, Everybody has different experiences. Obviously, ours is not universal. So go ahead and email us. But speaking of universal, we think that, and in my opinion, probably the number one reason why School AUs are so good and why people write them so much is because it is a near universal experience for most people reading fic. Um, a lot of countries, like, it's illegal to not go to school. Like, you have to go to school. So to have a setting in which you have, like, the your audience just completely understands what it is automatically, it's just a lot easier to
Mhm.
write it and for people to like it.
Yeah, it feels almost in a weird way in a genre that is already you can use a ton of shorthand and just sort of skip things. Like we don't need to know the character's backstory all over again. We were there. Participated in canon. This feels like even more shorthand. Like if I say he opened his locker. I don't need to explain anything else. Like you know
No.
exactly what I'm talking about and where that character is. So, like in terms of dressing it up and putting it somewhere, it's really, really easy to put it in a high school.
It is, or a college, or like the perspective of the teacher. Like, you, even if you aren't yourself a teacher, even if you haven't gone to college, you have a knowledge base of it because of the media that we've grown up with, because
Mhm.
of maybe our parents have gone to college and they've talked about it. Maybe you have read other fic and you're just able to glean information from other fic or other books you've read. It's just easier for fic writers to find a space that is almost ubiquitous for everyone reading. That's why coffee shop AUs are also a big thing, a big hit,
Mhm.
because practically everyone's gone to a coffee shop, um, and kind of knows the societal expectations of that space. It's fun. It's good, and it's like a set. It's easier to
Mhm.
just put your characters onto a known set that's a known
Mhm.
quantity for everyone reading and for the author.
I feel like that for a lot of younger writers, which we'll discuss it more in detail later, but I feel like a lot of younger in age writers, teenagers in fandom, write a lot of high school AUs. Like, obviously, not all of them. That's a little bit too much of a blanket statement, but I feel like a lot of them are the ones who end up writing it. And I would argue that part of that is it's deceptively easy because it speaks to your own experiences. I feel like there's an argument to be made for that's the reason why some male characters get gender swapped to female is because a lot of fandom is female and it is kind of seductive to be like, oh, I'll just transplant some of my experiences as a woman onto this character because it seems like it'll make it easier. I feel like high school AUs end up being the same shtick. Is I'll just transplant my experiences onto the character because that'll make it easier to write.
Ah,
Right?
true. That's so true. I was also going to say that a lot of characters are male.
Hmm.
So if they're going to gender swap, it's going to be to
Usually,
I
I
guess you could
don't.
make them non binary, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and to be completely honest, the only time I've ever seen a female swap to a male is when you just completely swap everybody in a canon.
Yes.
So, but digression aside, I feel like a lot of people start out writing it because the familiarity, the fact that other people recognize it pretty instantaneously are like, oh, I can do this. This is totally simple. Which, as a writer, I can tell you that it never seems to work out like that. It always ends up being more complicated than you think because your experience and how you translate it gets really tricky because where do you draw the line between what you would do and what the character would do and what's the difference between your high school in Nebraska and their high school in California? I mean, that's not even getting into high school AUs are really popular in Asian media fandom because guess what? In anime, they use high school as just a setting all the time. Thing is, Japanese high schools work significantly differently than American high schools, and you can
They
always tell
really
when
do.
somebody has not done the research, which is exciting. It like, I don't know. I don't know if anybody else does this, but I have a section of my brain that goes, "Ah, yes, they've Americanized this anime media." So it's the dub version, and I have the version that's okay. It's in English, but they clearly did the research, and it's still culturally Japanese. So this is the sub version.
Yeah, and I think I read somewhere that the reason why so many stories are set in high school or like, higher public education in Japan is because that's the last time that they have any real amount of like off time.
hmm
Like once they get into their career, it's apparently in Japan, it's just a lot harder to like have adventures or like do anything outside of work and or be at home and taking care of yourself kind of a situation. um
hmm
it's
Which,
interesting. It's
to
interesting.
be to be completely fair to the Japanese, I think
Uh-huh.
that the reason why some people set their stories in a high school or a college AU is exactly the same thing. Because it's one
Yeah.
of the few times in your life where you are both emotionally complicated enough to make a long form story and also have enough of your pyramid of needs being met
Yeah.
that you can like move and explore and learn and do different things. Like even in college to a certain
Yeah.
extent, it's got this rigid external structure to it that weirdly enough allows greater freedom.
But it also has a set community.
hmm
So it's easier for like relationships to bloom when everybody is seeing each other all the time. This is why workplace relationships happen. This is why people get married outside of right out of college a lot here in the United States.
hmm
It's because you have a group of people that are interested in the same things as you, living in the same space, and you are ostensibly all within like certain set of miles around this college, around this university, and you all are the same age.
Roughly. Which
Roughly.
from a writing standpoint is really seductive. Again, a lot of this is
Yeah,
like, wow, this makes my job way easier because you're like, I just have their friend group and that's who they interact with and that's all the characters I really need to talk about. Maybe I need to name one professor. And it's really easy to set up relationship focused plots because your stakes can be your assignments or y- your parents or things that the characters don't necessarily have a lot of control over and you don't need to explain as an author why they don't have control over that. You're just like they're in high school or they're in college. What are they going to do about it?
honestly. Another reason why somebody would like to maybe write a high school or write a school AU or read a school AU is due to the fact that school AUs, because of their inherent kind of reality based structure or our reality based structure, is that the characters tend to have lower stake adventures, especially compared to their canon, or at least relative to their canon. Like a lot of, I read this fic once where all of the Marvel characters, the main Marvel characters, were teachers at an elementary school. And obviously they weren't fighting Thanos in
That
that
we
fic
know of.
that we know of. I didn't finish it, so maybe they all suited up and fought Thanos, but they weren't super powered. They didn't have, you know, incredible like battles in that fic
hmm
because they were elementary school teachers and it was truly about the relationships between all of them and how they interacted with each other in a mundane way. I didn't finish it because it was pretty long, but I
hmm
think it was over like 400,000 words.
Jeez.
But I know, it was like it was everyone, like Phil Coulson and like it was crazy. Anyway, they just had lower stakes compared to their fic,
hmm
or sorry, compared to their canon, and obviously there was a big audience for that. People liked that. They're like, "Oh yeah, how would these
hmm
characters, because of who I know who them to be in the canon, how would they interact with each other if they were teachers in elementary school? That'd be interesting to read," because that fic got a lot of readers. And to me, that is just an extension of like, why do people like AU? Because a lot of people end up reading almost only canon compliant fic when they first started reading fic, because that's what happened to me, and I have found out online through a number of people that that's true for, essentially across the
Mhm.
board. And then
Yeah,
they start getting into
missing
AUs.
scenes are like your starter drug. You're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
this is a gap here that could be filled with something interesting, and then it's too late for you.
Oh, it's so true. You get your first coffee shop AU and you can't put it down, kind of a situation. And I think also the reason why people start doing that, the reason why it kind of ends up that way, it's actually a good thing that it ends up that way. It's good because you really get to know who these characters are from the fans' point of view. You get to know kind of the fanon of that character, and then you can know when you have found a fic later on that is an AU as to whether that is in character or not. So it's a good thing that the trajectory of most people's like going into fic is that way, in my opinion. But this is all just to say that the stakes of these fic tend to be a lot softer, and that's why we also call this a fluffier AU, because, well, my recommendation is not necessarily fluffy. Later on at the end of this episode, I'm going to rec a fic, but it tends to be a trope that is much nicer than the fandom or than the canon that you watch or read for these fandoms. And that's just nice sometimes. Sometimes people just want to read something less high stakes because they want to enjoy these characters in a softer situation.
I mean, gotta be honest, like, I'm sure that we've all been on the fluff angst smut cycle. And
So much. Oh my god.
uh this fills the fluff niche really nicely where you're like, I just read something super angsty and sad and I need good things to happen to these characters. Yeah, you reach for something like this usually.
I will say the best fic out there incorporates all three. But sometimes you just need a dose of fluff to get you through the day. Sometimes you need a dose of smut, sometimes you need a dose of tragedy. And you can get all of that in fic, and the best ones, you can get all three in one. It's the best.
Just to tag on really quick, I feel like
Yeah.
the other thing that you're talking about, like canon compliance versus AU, the really great thing about school AUs is because it's such a big umbrella with so many different things under it, you really do get the whole gamut from this is a canon compliant, so like a lot of academy era stuff, as long as you don't actually go into their backstory, sure, why not? It's canon compliant. To nope, this is wildly AU. You know,
Yeah.
they never went to high school because they live in fantasy land, but in this case, they're going to a regular American Midwest high school. Don't question it.
The character that I'm about to talk about, that's practically it is essentially canon compliant. So yeah. Let me just talk about that a little bit actually. Hob from Dreamling, from the Sandman fandom. Hob is a immortal character who was born in the 14th century, early 14th century, and he, because he was born so long ago and has lived for so long and has experienced history, he is a character that authors tend to make a history professor and not a teacher in like high school or middle school or somewhere. He is always a professor in college. And they usually make it a setting for him to be able to like have a job, which he enjoys, but also like, Dream comes in and watches him teach and he gets flustered. Like I can't count how many times I've read that in fic. But it is like certain characters just tend to put on that role, and I don't think it's ever stated in in canon that he was ever a teacher. But that's just fanon now. That, oh, if you're gonna give Hob a job, it's most likely going to be a history professor for modern times. They give him lots of jobs in the past. He wasn't always a professor. But if it's a modern AU and he's still an immortal, he's gonna be a history professor. Sometimes I have seen it that he's not an immortal, he's just a random guy who like is a history professor. But anyway, that to me, if it is mostly about Dream visiting him at school, that is, in my opinion, a school AU. It's not technically like about students. But I don't think that that's technically what a school AU should be, you know?
Hmm.
Also, I think we should talk about how our tastes change a little bit, B.
Hmm. So I think this is a good point is I need to start segueing maybe more into like so we know why people write it, but why do people read it?
So
Because that is
much.
the
People read
other,
this stuff so much.
yeah, because it again it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere.
Mhm.
And some of it is clearly the fluff potential. Like it's like candy,
Oh, yeah.
you can't just have one. But it's interesting to me because I've never been huge into high school AUs specifically. But as I've gotten older, I've definitely noticed that I was more open to it when I was younger. And then I s- college AUs were more my jam and continue to be. But even now, as I am an adult professional, sorry kids, I am old.
We
Um,
both are. What do you talk?
uh,
We're in
I
our mid 20s and we're old.
even now I find that I'll read a college AU, but generally I tend to gravitate more towards adult professionals. Like I would rather read and they're both teachers or a teacher and a parent AU than they're necessarily college students, and definitely a lot more than high school. And I've seen that sort of in the relative ages of people in fandom that
Yeah.
the younger you are, the more open you are to a high school AU, whereas as you get older, you kind of are like, that's not really my thing anymore. And I think it says something about how we perhaps perceive those settings and those types of characters, because I gotta be honest, as an adult, whatever Shine High School had has kind of worn off. Like you could not pay me to go back.
God, I never had any shine toward high school, even when I was in high school. The whole time I was in high school, I was thinking, just gotta get through it. Just gotta get through it. There's so much more in the world than high school. Just gotta get through it. You know?
Um,
Like,
and
ugh.
even from that perspective, like, why would I want to read about that? Like, when
Exactly.
it's done, it's over, and the sort of people who enjoyed it and were having the time of their lives in high school, well, I clearly wasn't them,
And I clearly wasn't friends with them.
and why would I
Like,
want to read about that? It just like the older you get, the more you're like, huh, well, yeah, okay, that may or may not be accurate, but it's not something I want to revisit in my escapism.
I just realized something. So you and I had very similar experiences with this. You and I both didn't really love high school AUs growing up because we both grew up in fandom. And then as we got older in college, like college AUs were fine, but we've always kind of gravitated more toward like, aged characters in our fic. But the thing is, I did like high school AUs sometimes, and the this is gonna say something about me. The only times I really liked reading high school AUs was when the characters were going through some bad stuff. And it's because I went through some bad stuff in high school, went through some real bad mental things.
Which it could be argued that it's a form of catharsis. You are
It
soothing
was
your inner child. Look, it gets better. It's not
exactly.
that anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
so if I am to read a high school AU now, and even back then, I only liked it when the characters were getting through something because that's what I was doing.
which is the flip side, to be fair. There is a non-fluffy side to school AUs, but they don't tend to be the predominant form, I would argue.
No, they
Um,
don't. They tend to be fluffy. They tend to be fluffy. But if there's a tragic high school AU out there, I'm going to read it. I'm going to find it. It's going to find me, you know? But that doesn't tend to be what happens with the fic.
I think is part of what people like about reading them is they tend to be lighter. Again, it's your fluff element, especially if you were reading darker AUs or the canon itself is just darker. Like I gotta tell you, reading a Witcher high school AU is a completely different flavor. Like not only is it not something I'd really want to read, but the Witcher canon is super dark and bloody and gory, and it doesn't really translate to a modern high school. So you know when you go into it that, oh yeah, this is gonna be lighter than canon.
Yeah. I think we have slowly gone into our opinion sections.
Oh yeah,
Our
we know we have
opinions.
segued. We are in the
Yeah,
opinion
yeah.
section.
We're in it now.
So I already talked a little bit about, again, it's fluff, it's lighter, and I'll admit that I can see the appeal in sort of a childhood sweethearts kind of way, but I gotta be honest, for me at least, it's in a okay, so they have this history as teenagers, kids, young adults, but then the actual relationship bit happens as adults. Like that is very charming to me. So I guess it could be argued that that's part and parcel. It does feel like it's a slight remove from these AUs, but I guess that's going to be an opinion thing. And that is something though that it has the possibility to do that is quite enjoyable. Because everybody loves a good story where there's like tons of background relationship stuff, right? I mean, look at Stucky. Just so much happening in their backstory.
All the much.
But
They met on the schoolyard, though.
yeah,
So
so I guess
I've
you could have a school AU of that. I
seen that.
mean, in college AUs, I will also admit that they have this amazing capacity for hijinks. Like, as
They
soon
do.
as you're like, we're removing the parental element, but we're adding the ability to drink, like, the amount of shenanigans just goes way up.
It really does. It really does. Plus, they can drive.
Oh, yeah. There's a guarantee that they are of an age to drive.
Yeah.
Mm.
Which is probably why middle school isn't a thing. Unless it's a. I have found characters in middle school in which, like, they meet in kindergarten and then it goes all the way through all of their years, right? Of
Mhm.
school. I've seen that.
Yeah. But I don't know, like, there's something about wacky hijinks that charms me a lot more
When they're
because
young.
yeah, because
Yeah.
again, because the stakes tend to be lower. It's not usually life or death, it's usually parental approval or grades or something. And so you have a bigger capacity for humor in that case, which I am a huge proponent of humor. There should be more humor in everything. Um,
There should be.
yeah,
Um,
so in case you haven't noticed, as ever, I don't read a ton of high school AUs or honestly a lot of school AUs, so I kind of struggled with figuring out what the reading of them was bringing to the table, since it's not necessarily my jam. You go ahead and give us your case.
Well, the thing about school AUs, I really loved school. I didn't love high school, which I loved middle school. Really, I loved middle school because I had a really great group of friends, wasn't dealing with mental health issues. I was able to get good grades, of which I was able to do later too. But I don't know, like, school was always something I was good at, and I really enjoyed being good at it. High school was really rough because I wasn't able to be good at it anymore because of mental health stuff. But then college came around and I kicked ass, and I met you, B, and everything was really falling into place. It felt like a good time for me. So it's nice to go back and kind of reminisce a little bit about my own experiences when I'm reading school AUs. But I think on that same vein, the reason why I enjoy School AUs is because of its familiarity. I know the structure inherently of what it is to be at a school, especially if it is based in the United States. Or I'm sure, like, Canada can't be that different if it's set in Canada or somewhere. Like, even if it's an alien school, I can be like, I kind of know what this is. It's a place for learning, and I'm very familiar with the places for learning, um, in my own experience. So that's always very nice for me. Like, okay, for example, I was talking to B before we started recording, and I used this example, and I think I'm going to use it again. When you're putting people in the on a pirate ship, there's a vernacular that you use on a pirate ship that, if you aren't aware of, you're going to have to kind of muddle through that vernacular. You're going to have to muddle through the vocabulary of being on a pirate ship. What is aft? What is starboard? What is what's even a sail sometimes? Like, you have to figure out, like, what the language is in that fic. I already know the language of school. I loved school. So it's just a lot easier, I think, for a lot of people to read School AUs because it's a framework that they are really familiar with. And that is like important. I think it's more important than most people realize when they're reading this kind of fic.
Mhm.
And I think that is a huge proponent of it. People really like reading this fic because it's just easy for them. It's not an alien culture that they have to get used to, and it is not a fantastical superhero, base of operations somewhere. It is just a regular old school,
Mhm.
and they've been around for a long time. They've been around for millennia.
Mhm.
Obviously, the culture and language around them have changed, but these tend to be modern AUs. It's not like people
Mhm.
put them in like a Greek um uh what is that? What is oh
They're not in
no.
a forum where a philosopher is
It's
giving a
not a
lecture.
forum, exactly. It's not a colloquium. That's the word I was
Mhm.
trying to find. It's not a colloquium of scholars trying to talk about their own inner machinations of their mind. Like, it's not that kind of thing. But a lot of these tend to be modern, and because of that, it's like going into a warm bath. It's easy
Mhm.
and comforting at the same time.
And I haven't found a good way to say this, so you're gonna have to bear with me to the end. But there's something to be said for the a type of story and a type of escapism that you're not immediately required to engage with it critically. Like, you
Yes,
can just let
exactly.
it be. You understand what's going on, and it isn't that complicated, and it's familiar, it's soothing.
And to me, that is the definition of what fluff is.
Mhm. So, I don't know. Like I said, I couldn't think of a whole lot else from my perspective that I'm like, "Ah, yes, this is why people love to read it. This is good stuff."
Yeah, yeah. But what I mean by that's the definition of fluff is you don't have to interact with it super critically. You're just enjoying it. And sometimes fluff, by that definition, is not necessarily happy.
True.
You know, it's just something that you can read without having to overly analyze. We've just talked a lot about the good, but what is what we think the bad of this AU, B?
So, the flip side for me, an English major, is it's really, really hard for me to turn off my critical thinker. Uh,
So difficult. I can't do it. My roommate gets so mad at me when I hate a movie we're watching. I just
yeah.
cannot not think critically of something, you
Mhm.
know? Ugh, it's probably really annoying.
So that can make it kind of hard sometimes when there's subtext and implications that have been written into the story that maybe weren't examined very far when the writing was happening because they were never meant to really be thought critically about. And unfortunately that some of the things that get baked in are things that are personal pet peeves of mine. And some of it is, I will admit, it is 100% a personal preference. There is nothing inherently wrong with it. But when you've got characters who are younger, and sometimes because they are being written by younger people, they tend to have emotional reactions that are not necessarily coherent. And to be completely honest, I don't enjoy that. It is not my favorite thing to read about a bunch of kids having the emotional range of a child.
Same.
And unfortunately, that's sort of baked into a high school AU because you are perforce, for most cases, de-aging the characters. So it feels like a downgrade in my brain where I'm going, okay, these could theoretically be rational adults doing rational adult things with complex ranges of emotion and
Yes.
nuance, and now you're turning them into teenagers and they have teenage drama.
If a child though, we're saying child, 14 to 18.
Ye-
If the person of that age is going through something and they have to get old, they have to experience life in a way that most or hopefully most people of that age experience that's interesting to me, because I had to do that. Kind of. I'm making it sound really bad, but OCD is a bitch. Like, I just gotta say, it's a terrible thing, especially when you're growing up. And I think that, not to continue to defend the AU or something, but like, that's the only way in which I will enjoy a high school AU. I don't know if I would enjoy it now, because I'm just so far away from high school now.
Mhm.
But at the time, that was how I enjoyed it more, or at least a little bit enjoyed it. There are some really great high school supernatural AUs out there. Really good.
Good to know.
Sad.
That
Incredibly sad.
feels in keeping with the fandom as I
It
know it.
does. Yeah, exactly. That's why it worked. Because it captured
Mhm.
the fandom, and like, it just makes sense. Yeah, of course Dean's gonna be, he needs help.
Troubled?
Yeah, troubled. Troubled child. Anyway, go on.
Which, again, it's a personal preference for me. I understand that there's a lot of reasons why you would write it like that and why it makes sense and why it's even realistic, but sometimes it grates, especially as an adult. Now, on a more nuts and bolts writing perspective, kind of in keeping with that, the nice thing about this AU, which is that it is familiar and it has a fairly rigid structure and it all makes sense, it means that sometimes if you're not super careful about how you set up your plot, you have to sort of create tension. And the natural thing to do is to have teenagers be teenagers and make kind of suspect decisions and then get upset about it. So it makes it feel somewhat manufactured, at least to me. Because having a plot where you didn't have enough tension, so you have to manufacture tension so that you're going to leverage the somewhat irrationality of teenagers, which I already find somewhat suspect. Okay, even as a teenager, I'm like, look, we have a full range of human emotions and we know what we're supposed to do. We just don't always choose to do it. It bothers me because it's artificial. Like, the nice thing about the School AU is that it's really easy to put external pressure on these characters within their framework, but at the same time, if you don't do that right, anyway, I feel like I'm over explaining it at this point. It is a
It's okay.
flaw.
Yeah, to us, it's an inherent flaw in the trope. But that's because we're old, man. We're just
Yes.
oldies.
We're fandom old, but not
We're
yet
not.
your mothers. So we're in that awkward age group.
The thing is, we're actually not fandom old. Fandom old is a definition that you can have. Like, you could be 70 and just started getting into fandom, and you would be fandom young. But because we've been in the fandom for so long, that's why we're fandom old. It doesn't
Fair.
have anything to do with age, in my opinion.
So I think the last major thing that you need to be prepared for, I guess, going in to look at high school or college AUs, school AUs, is they can be kind of samey sometimes. And you're thinking, well, it's fic and it's fic with this specific trope, of course. Like, how many different flavors of coffee shop AU are there? That's part of what you want to go in. But at the same time, for like such a big umbrella, like there really are a startlingly small number of plot lines you can get. Jock nerd romance is enormous in all flavors. And I mean even the teacher I use, like PE teacher, math teacher, or art teacher.
Love it. Love it.
Um,
English teacher, PE teacher is not
mhm.
a thing so much, but it is also still cute.
Having a fake relationship of some flavor, huge. Um,
Big,
on all
big.
levels.
Mhm.
Some form of tutoring. Like, it doesn't even have to be jock nerd necessarily. Just X character is better at subject than Y character, so they end up getting tutored. A lot of times this gets thrown in with the fake relationship, like you tutor me, I'll pretend to date you.
Yes.
Um,
That wasn't that the same plot as Can't Buy Me Love, that 80s film?
I don't know, I'll have to take your word.
You should watch it. It's really cute. McDreamy is the main character when he was young. The guy, McDreamy, you know
Okay.
the guy
I don't know the guy, but I will trust you.
from Grey's Anatomy.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
You
Anyway,
could literally be making this up right now and I would
I
agree with
could.
you.
That,
Mhm.
you say stuff like that to me all the time, and I have the same response. Anyway, um, uh, and then you also have here teenager encounters mental illness, which I bared my soul a little bit
Yeah.
earlier. um, baby's first mental illness is a thing, and there should be fic written for that,
Mhm.
but sometimes it is a little bit like the person who's writing it maybe hasn't experienced it,
Mhm.
and maybe doesn't exactly know what it is like to experience it.
Or to be honest, I've read versions that they've done a lot of research and it feels very in keeping, but this is the angst flavor of this AU in a lot of ways. And I mean, teacher AUs have a slightly different flavor subset wherein they're the teachers dealing with baby's first mental illness, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
if I think angst for this AU, I basically go, is one or more of the characters mental ill and or are they dealing with the fallout of that? The answer is almost always yes. Very rarely you'll get a teen pregnancy AU.
That is also true, but usually a lot of the high school AUs I've read are not het. I will say the one supernatural fic that I am thinking of that is it was essentially the last high school AU I've ever read, and that was years ago now. It was like 3 years ago. Was between Dean and Cass in high school, and Dean was dealing with hurting himself because of how terrible his father is, which is mentally bad for him. But I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a specific mental illness that they were getting at in the fic. I didn't finish it. I need to finish it. Um,
It is the
it's
fallout
on my
thereof.
list. It's the fallout of getting abused at home,
Mhm.
and getting neglected by his own father and having to take care of his brother. They kind of put Cass in a similar situation. It's an interesting fic, but both of them are dealing with neglectful parents in some way, which you can get mental illnesses from that, but I like it's not like they're specifically dealing with depression. Well, they are, but I don't know. I don't know
It's
how to describe
thematically
it.
got a different emphasis.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Mhm.
interesting. But I guess as a person who did deal with mental illness in high school, it's not weird for me to read that. But I'm not saying you didn't deal with mental illness, but from my perspective, it isn't weird for me to read that.
No, and I'm not trying to
Yeah,
say that it is or that that plot line is
yeah, I
inherently
know
bad. I'm just saying that it's inherently common.
it
And
is.
that
It's
may be a
very
product
common.
of, again, how do you make something that's fairly low stakes, high stakes? You add an element of realism, and what is some of the real terrible things that you can deal with at any age is illness. And how do you not have the fault in our stars? You make mental illness. Because I gotta tell you, putting X character has cancer in the middle of your high school AU is a real downer. Like,
Oh,
I
it is.
you can
Yeah,
do it. It may be the best thing anybody's ever written, but it is definitely going to bring down the mood.
it's definitely a thing you can do. Okay, shit. We just got really into that. I think there's basically nothing else to talk about unless you, the person listening to this, have a point that you want to make. So just email us if you want to make your point, and we will talk about it in the show.
Mhm.
Okay, so Rat Corner! B, do you want to go first?
All right, so I've got two because one of them you can't read, and I'm putting this here still as an object lesson to all of us. So my first one that you can't read is called Narnia Ain't Got Nothing on This by Attack of the Z, and it is gone now. It has been removed from AO3 from whence it came, and it was removed relatively recently. And I'm going to put this as an object lesson because it is a Marvel fic. It is Stucky. It was written in, I want to say, 2015-ish, and it was removed sometime after 2021 when last I read it. If you love a fic, if you want to read it again, even if it's just silly, save it because it can just disappear magically in the night. So, yeah, if you would have liked to read a really cute college AU, where Bucky was a creature that lived somewhat in Steve's closet, while Steve was a completely normal, sleep-deprived college student who was just like, I guess you're my
Oh,
roommate now. This would have been what you should have read. It doesn't exist anymore. But to soothe
good
the hurt
luck.
of that, there is one that I've got that you can still read. It is also a college AU, but it is Teen Wolf. I hesitate to call it Steric, but maybe it is. It is called Accountability by Withlightning, and it is an outsider perspective on Styles when he goes to college, and it's a whole bunch of people looking at him going, "You're not really okay, and there's something really wrong with your life that maybe we should save you from, but we're not sure enough about what's going on to know what to do." It's really kind of amusing. I wouldn't call it funny because it is somewhat dark, but it is really amusing seeing them go, "Oh geez. Oh geez, maybe he's in a cult. Maybe this is bad."
Maybe this is not a good situation. I need to read that. I love a good steric. I mean, it's kind of steric, but yeah.
I think it
Okay,
might be,
so
but it's outsider point of view, so
mine is one of my more recent Dinluke fics that I've read. It's called Go and Get Your Hands Dirty by Furiosophie. I think we've talked about Furiosophie in the past because I recognize that name. It's really interesting. So, you know what? I'm just going to read the summary. I'm going to read the whole summary because it's really good and I want this to pique people's interest. There is an agonizing moment where Din feels Luke's body tense beneath him, his muscles flexing in a way that makes him sure Luke is about to punch or at least push him away. But then something shifts behind Luke's eyes, as if he recognized the fear in Din's, and before Din can form another coherent thought, Luke crushes their lips together and kisses him as if his life depends on it, which, if you read the story, yes, it kind of does. The summary continues. Din meets Luke twice a day, 5 days a week, in a way that's casual, predictable, impersonal, until that one day where he meets him by accident in the middle of the night in a way that's neither. Talk about structure, right? Because if you're a parent and you drop your kid off and you pick them up, then you're meeting the teacher every day, 10 times a week, like that's crazy.
Mhm.
But I will say Luke is the kindergarten teacher of Grogu, and Din finds Luke in a club shot. Like, Din is shot. Luke is in the club, and Din is like, help me. And Luke's like, okay. It's very good. I would recommend it. It's very sweet. If you like hurt comfort, oh boy, this will help your horror tendencies because, well, it'll exacerbate your horror tendencies for hurt comfort. It's really good. It's very sweet, and some of it does take place in a school, so it's kind of a school AU. One of them's a teacher. So yeah, if you like the concept of Luke being a kindergarten teacher badass motherfucker, then go ahead and read that fic. Read the other one too. It sounds really cute. And good luck on the first one that Bea talked about. But yeah, I think that we are done.
Yeah, so I guess we'll see y'all next time on
Fangirls Anonymous. Bye!